Welcome to the Pretty Powerful Podcast, where powerful women are interviewed every week to share real inspiring stories and incredible insight to help women or anyone break the barriers, be a part of innovation, shatter the glass ceiling, and dominate to the top of their sport, industry, or life's mission. Join us as we celebrate exceptional women and step into our power. And now, here's your host, Angela Gennari.
Hello, and welcome to the Pretty Powerful Podcast. My name is Angela Gennari, and I am joined today by Linda Criblez. Thank you so much for joining me, Linda.
Thank you so much for having me on your show.
I am so excited to talk to you. So this has been, for our listeners, this has been a few months in the works because Linda has a super interesting and impressive background, and we had to get things properly vetted, and so just so you guys know, I am so incredibly elated to introduce Linda to you today. So Linda, now as of yesterday, serves as the Deputy Director of Homeland Security at the Georgia Emergency Management and Homeland Security Agency. In this position, she oversees the Homeland Security Division, which includes field coordinators, intelligence, critical infrastructure, and cybersecurity departments of the agency, with a focus on school safety, public safety, critical infrastructure protection, and cybersecurity. A retired Chief of Station and Senior Operations Officer for the Central Intelligence Agency, that is the CIA, she has expertise in counter-terrorism, hard target threats, and cybersecurity. Her range of assignments included leading a CIA station with regional branches, dozens of personnel, and covering a large geographic area, managing relationships with dozens of agencies and partners. This is so incredibly impressive. Her Washington-based assignments included an executive role, leading the personnel planning, contractor training, budget, strategy, policy, communications, and employee engagement for hundreds of personnel, and a budget in the hundreds of millions of dollars. She served as an operations officer with assignments around the world and started her operational career as part of the 9/11 task force. She began her career with GEMA Homeland Security in 2022, immediately after her retirement from the CIA. She earned a BA in Russian history and an MA in international relations from the University of Chicago. Wow, so impressive.
Oh, thank you.
So I cannot wait to dive into this. So, I mean, so many questions, but I just want to actually just get started by saying, what led you to the CIA?
So I never had any plan or inclination of joining the CIA. I am from a farming family in Ohio.
Wow.
And in college, I studied Russian history and international relations. And at the time, my plan was to become a professor. And I was a very altruistic young woman. Yeah. And I was convinced that I was going to come up with a theory to settle international conflict and to promote, global harmony.
Yeah, well, it's not too late. We still need that.
Right. So that was my plan, but very altruistic. But at the same time, I was realistic enough to appreciate that perhaps I might be more credible in that, being more than 22 years old and having some real world experience.
Sure.
So I thought to myself, gosh, where can I get real world experience? And I thought, I know, I've watched movies. The CIA, those guys got real world experience. So
wow.
I applied and miraculously got a job there and just never looked back.
So, Linda, tell me about your journey to the CIA. What is that like? Because I know it's a little different than, just going out and applying for jobs on Indeed. I'm sure there's a much more, scrutinized process that's involved. So if somebody's 20 years old and they're listening to this, what would be your recommendation? What do they study, or how do they go about joining the CIA?
Well, in terms of what to study, we need career sets from all across the spectrum, from the kind of degree I had, traditional international relations, Russian history, to technology degrees, even the visual arts. We need people from all walks of life. But the main thing to stress is patience, and you might as well have a job or be in school and be prepared to wait. So it was different back when I applied than it is now in a lot of ways, but fundamentally it's the same. So I'm embarrassed to admit I'm old enough that back then you applied by mail in the U.S. Postal Service. So I mailed in an application, and then there were interviews and polygraphs and background investigations, and all of that is interspersed with long periods of waiting and radio silence. And that's definitely true today. But what was kind of funny about my journey is that when I was ultimately hired by CIA, it directly coincided with my marriage to my husband, to whom I am still married. And the individual who did my background investigation interviewed my character references the week preceding and following my wedding. Oh, wow. And one of my mom's friends was so offended. She interrogated and said, "Did you attend Linda's wedding in order to vet her for federal service? That is invasive." And he was so aghast. He had no idea what she was talking about. Right. But after that, there was more waiting. And then I ended up finding out that I had been hired while I was on my honeymoon. My husband and I went on an extended honeymoon in Europe, and I knew I couldn't talk about it internationally, but I would call home every few days and ask my mom, did I get any mail? And every day it was no. And then one day I was in Paris and asked the question, and she said, "You got some mail?" And I said, "Please open it and just tell me yes or no." And she said the answer was yes. Oh, wow. And I was just elated. But we were on our honeymoon, so we went out on our day of sightseeing. But my husband said, "Linda, this is such an important day for you and for us, and I want to capture the moment. So I want to take a picture of how you feel today so that you can always remember it." And back then, there were no cell phone cameras, so I had to wait to see the picture when I got home. But the image that he captured was, I literally jumped in the air for joy, and I had this look of elation on my face and the hugest smile, and I was right in front of the Louvre.
Oh, that's so cool.
And I always kept that picture, and I would look at it either in my mind's eye or physically, especially on bad days or when I had screwed something up, and just reminded myself of that girl and just remembered that whatever problems you're having today, she would have been thrilled to change places with you. So.
Wow, that's such a good story. I love that. And I think that's something that we can all keep in mind of, how we felt when we took a job or started college, because we're going to have hard days, right? And so those hard days feel like they're weighing on you, but it's not bigger than that moment of like, I really did something here, right? So good for you. I love that story. That's very cool. Thank you. So without disclosing confidential information, can you tell me about one of the most meaningful assignments that you've ever had at the CIA?
So that's a great question and a tough question for me because literally every assignment in CIA is the best assignment in CIA because after you reach a certain point in your career, you have your choice of assignments. You have to bid on them and earn them, but the world is your oyster. You can live and work in any part of the world and work on any problem set. So like every single one of my assignments was one I just cherished. But this is dated, but there's no better honor that I ever had in my career than serving as part of the CIA's response to 9/11. Yeah. So prior to 9/11, I was working in the counter-terrorism center, and we knew an attack was coming. There was intelligence information out there. This has been written about in books, but we didn't know enough about time, place, location to stop it. Right. But there was a sense of urgency, and I remember running down the halls of Langley with one of my bosses, trying to keep up, partly because he was so much taller than me, and I was in heels and I'm short, but he kept saying, "Linda, we have to convince the folks downtown that something is going to happen." But, we did our best, but that day happened, and it was terrible for all Americans, especially people who lost family members and loved ones in that attack. But it left me with equal parts guilt that we didn't do something to stop the attack, even though we weren't able to. It just wasn't possible, but also determination to go after masterminds of that attack and make sure it never happened again. So I was privileged to be a part of the task force that did that. And while I was on the task force, we captured several of the individuals responsible. So I was involved in that, and we were successful in preventing some counterattacks, and it was just the experience of a lifetime. And one thing I think is pertinent to this context to say about that task force is that it was predominantly led by women. Now there were men involved all over the place, but especially in the field, the ones that did a lot of the operational work in the field. But in terms of the people combing through leads like night and day, it was dominated by women. And if you would have taken a picture of that group, you wouldn't have thought, hey, there's a group of super spies. You would have thought, is this a Girl Scout convention?
Wow.
Why is it? And everyone looks tired.
We're exhausted.
Yeah. But it was a tremendous group. And from that group are some of my biggest mentors. One of them was Jen Matthews, who tragically died in the Coast incident in Pakistan.
Wow.
She was one of my first bosses in CIA, and she, again, tragically passed away in that incident. And then the other was Gina Haspel, who went on to become the first female director of CIA. And I had the opportunity to work with her off and on throughout my career. And I just have to say, she was a role model to me because she is one of the most humble, down-to-earth women you would meet. But she is wicked smart on top of it. And she kept a low profile as a director, so to speak, but she got us through COVID. She was responsible for so many successes.
That's awesome. I mean, and I'm so incredibly excited that you had great women mentors, even in a field like the CIA, because I think we all have the perception that being a woman would be incredibly challenging and that you'd be one of the few. So it's so encouraging to hear that you were on a task force that was mostly women, and that women are out there doing really badass things.
Absolutely.
And, going after terrorists and protecting our country. So, I mean, I'm just elated to hear that. So that's incredible. So how does being a female in the CIA differentiate you? Like, did you have an advantage? Did you have a disadvantage? I know that you were saying that a lot of the women on the task force for 9/11 were female. So can you tell me what that feels like in the CIA? Do you think it's an advantage or a disadvantage? And do you see women who are in, kind of that super spy position out in the field?
So it's a relatively level playing field when you start. We hire, and I think this is true when I started, and it's definitely true now. Equal parts men and women. It largely depends on the profession you choose, but being an operations officer, there's some tremendous advantages to being a woman, actually, because you're doing clandestine work overseas, and your job is not to be caught.
Right.
And in a lot of different societies, women are underestimated.
Absolutely.
So they look at me and they think, oh, she's probably a secretary or a spouse or whatever, an administrative person. And so I felt that I could get away with a lot of things my male colleagues had more difficulty doing. Now, at the same time, there were things that were easier for them, and I had to make adjustments in terms of how I approach certain things to keep not on a very professional sitting when interacting overseas with men, so that it was abundantly clear this was a professional situation.
Right. Yes.
but I didn't find that as an encumberment. So I found it to be an advantage.
Really? That's fascinating. Well, and especially I would think that, in like overseas, if you're going after terrorists or you're in a country where women are kind of marginalized, I imagine being a woman might also kind of be a little, it's almost like you were saying, you're underestimated, but is it also something where they're immediately, wondering why you're there?
Yes. And but they also fundamentally look at you as an American. And I've heard people say this that are, from different nationalities and backgrounds, even, our naturalized citizens that work at the agency, that when you present yourself as CIA, and this is true for State Department officials or the U.S. military, foreign nationals look at you as an American first and foremost. And even in countries where women are really kept in hiding, they treat you like a representative of the U.S. government. And I always really valued that, and it was something that surprised me.
That's really fascinating. Well, and it's when we go back to that women in the CIA thing, I also had Debbie Gardner on here, who was with the Georgia Bureau of Investigation, and she was in charge of internet crimes against children, and she was saying that in her department it was also mostly women. So I just love that women are out here doing some really incredible things, which was kind of the reason that this podcast started. Is I'm very fortunate to know some exceptional women in my life, and I think everybody should know them. Like everybody should know you, and everybody should know Debbie, and everybody should know all these women out here doing incredible things, because I think it's such an inspiration, and it's really eye-opening to see the impact that you're making throughout the world, not just, in our communities. So thank you for that.
Thank you. And thank you for having this platform for women. I've watched a lot of your shows and broadcasts, and I learn something new every time. And it's just wonderful. Women a lot of times don't have tremendous amount of free time because of family and work obligations, but they have time to listen to a podcast and learn something. So thank you.
Well, and I try to make it informative, and we talk about a lot of things that I think anyone can relate to in their regular life, whether it's, finance or business or being an author, or, whatever that is. I think there's so much that we can learn from each other. So thank you. So we know that the CIA's mission is to protect our national security, but with the constant threat of cyber attacks and the recent release of over 2 million credit card numbers on the dark web, what can we be doing at home to ensure we're not putting our families and our country at risk?
So that is a phenomenal question. And cybersecurity, in my opinion, is the national security challenge of our time for every country around the world, not just the United States. And part of my motivation for retiring out of CIA when I was age eligible and starting a career at GEMA Homeland Security is that from my optic, after 9/11, we did a wonderful job of keeping foreign threats overseas.
Yes, I agree.
But nowadays, between cyber threats, threats to our infrastructure and IP, the battle is inside. And so I wanted to be, working for a domestic agency. GEMA Homeland Security manages the state cybersecurity portal. So there's a lot of federal agencies, state agencies, really smart people working on this issue. But the question you asked, what can we do, is tremendously important, because the internet was designed to share information. It was not designed to protect information, and no amount of work, no matter how hard we try, is going to close all the holes. So in my professional experience at CIA and now at GEMA, I can tell you that a majority of cyber attacks have some form of human element in them, in the sense that someone makes a mistake along the way. And I don't mean that to disparage anyone, but just in the rush of the day, you click a link or you allow a vulnerability in your system. And there's cybersecurity education is not sexy stuff. No one really likes to deep dive into it, but those boring things like, making sure you're using a VPN, multi-factor authentication, and making sure you're communicating with trusted sources, all of those things can protect you. And, it's not 100% security, but you absolutely have to do it. And the optic I take anymore is that you have to protect your information and your cybersecurity just like you would protect your home, your family, and your valuables.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and they make it so tricky now. Like I have a VPN on my phone and my computer and everything, and it gets annoying because I'm like, okay, I can't go to different sites with a VPN, and so I have to pause it, and then but then you'll get this like random like, hey, it's the IRS sending you a text. Click this link, and you'll see that you owe money, and the IRS doesn't text you. So there's things, but if you're not smart about that kind of thing, it's just not your wheelhouse, right? So they're clear things are just not in my wheelhouse, and maybe I'm not thinking, wait a minute, did I pay that IRS bill? Because what if it coincided with me paying an IRS bill, and then all of a sudden I get this text and I'm like, oh wait, they didn't get it, let me click this. So I think that there's just so much where they disguise it in a way that they're pretty certain you're going to at least question if you should open it. And then if you think too hard, you're probably going to go ahead and open it because you're worried about the consequences of not, right? So we have to learn that 99% of the time it's going to be junk, right?
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, just swipe it. And if you're worried that it's legitimate, go to the actual website, log in, and see if there's a message waiting for you.
Yeah.
And a lot of what we do in my intelligence unit that we run is we try to put out information at the lowest classification level and if possible unclassified so it can get to the public, because these attacks are happening to small businesses, to mom and pop shops, and it can be devastating and people can't recover in some situations from them. So
it can be financially devastating to somebody. I mean, if you have, you have your retirement put into something and then all of a sudden there's a cyber attack, getting that money back might be next to impossible, or a savings account or bank, or and so that's a real scary scenario. So as somebody who really understands cybersecurity, where are these threats coming from mostly? What is the dark web? And can you give me a little bit of insight about what is the dark web and what does it mean if we're listed on the dark web? What does that mean?
Well, those are great questions, and there's a lot to unpack there. But for starters, the dark web is basically just the part of the internet that's not indexed, and where people try to trade in things that are illicit. And I'm sorry, can you remind me of the first part of your question?
What is the dark web, and what happens if we're in it? What if we get some kind of alert that your information's been sold on the dark web? How do we know if it is? And if we are those credit card tracking they try to sell you on the credit card monitoring services and the dark web monitoring. How accurate are they? And is there a way for us to know if our information's on the dark web?
So there are those services out there, but a lot of information that gets marketed on the dark web is actually information that's publicly available. So it's a really tricky space, but constantly monitoring your credit is a great idea. Constantly checking your bank accounts and all of your your pensions, in any kind of financial accounts that you have, because I believe it's a 3-day rule that the FBI has the ability, particularly for FDIC insured products, to get your money back. Okay. So as soon as you see a problem, contact the institution immediately. Don't wait. Okay. Even if you think, I smell something funny here. Yeah. It's probably
Don't
funny.
wait for the next statement to come out before you start comparing it. Make that call within 3 days is what you're saying.
Right, exactly.
Yes,
exactly.
Absolutely.
And there's been people who have prevented major problems within their companies by being brave enough to say, hey, I think I made a mistake here. I clicked a link.
Yes.
And they saved hundreds of millions of dollars because they spoke up, and no one wants to admit they make a mistake, right? But do it, because your IT people have mitigations that they can put in place immediately to
that's
help.
Good to know, because I think that would be a fear, right? If somebody clicks on something and then all of a sudden you're like, oh great, all of our financial information is out there now. But if somebody speaks up in time, that's really great advice that you can potentially save a lot of money for your company, for your family, whatever that is. So how prevalent is AI when it comes to fake social media profiles?
So that's a growing problem, and AI and efforts to break our encryption, machine learning, the computing power that's being put out there, all of these are tremendously dangerous threats. And there's, again, a lot of great minds working on the problems, but we're not going to be able to keep up with the challenge 100%. So again, I have this personal philosophy now that a well-informed citizen is our best defense against these threats. And the analogy I made earlier, I just can't repeat enough that you have to protect yourself and your information, and even the information that you consume with a discerning mind. You can't take anything anymore at face value. So I'll just give you an example in terms of spoofing. My niece runs an astrology business, very different line of work than what I do, but she's got a ton of followers. She's a published author, under 30, and she provides readings for people. So as soon as she became moderately successful, there were, I think, a half dozen spoofed accounts. And she didn't come to me for advice. She was just a smart young woman, and she educated her followers. Look, these are all of the fake accounts that are out there pretending to be me. And I will never come to you and ask you for money, because that's what these spoofed accounts were doing. They were finding her followers and offering services. She said, my business model is you come to me. I don't come to you and ask for money. And so I do take comfort in the fact that I feel that the younger generation is more savvy than us and older people on the internet. And I'll come home and I'll tell my kids something new I learned, and my teenagers will tell me, I know that. I know not to accept a friend request unless I know the person and have done my vetting. So well, and I used to get nervous when my son would play Xbox, because there were those forums that he could go on, and then he could chat and play games with people. And so I went to him and I'm like, listen, I want you to only play with friends that like in real life, not because they're friends of a friend of a friend of a friend. It can't be like, well, I know him because this is so and so's friend that he plays with all the time. And I'm like, no, it has to be an actual in real life friend, because I don't want you playing video games with some 60-year-old man who's, and no offense to 60-year-old men, but they don't need to be playing video games with my kid. Correct.
Who's 8, right? Correct. At that time. So, but yes. So, I agree that the younger generation is, I think they're well aware of some of the risks, and probably even more so than we are. And I always look at it where when you have something that is really, really incredibly popular and useful, and people are astonished by the great uses of it, on the flip side, there's equally bad uses of it, like ChatGPT. Right. So I look at things like, Chat GPT is all the rage right now. Oh, it can write reports for you. It can do social media posts. It can do advertisements. But what else? Right. So there's a sinister flip side of most things, especially when it comes to machine learning and artificial intelligence.
Absolutely. And working in the CIA and now in emergency management, I've always been in a risk-based field. And just because something has risk doesn't mean you don't take advantage of it. You just recognize the risk, try to mitigate it, and get value of it. And you had asked earlier about, the cybercrime problem. So it is tremendous, and it's multi-pronged. There's not a single source of it. So you have hostile state actors trying to conduct espionage. You have cyber criminals trying to simply get your money. And there's alliances within all of those groups. Right. But what's staggering about the problem is that Georgia Cyber Center has estimated that if you take that amount of money that they're worldwide taking from the public, it is the world's third largest economy. Wow. Which is mind-blowing. So that means the United States, China, and cyber criminals. And so this is something I would say, and this is not, this is Linda Criblez talking, not the GEMA, Homeland Security, but a lot of people, if they have cyber insurance, they are encouraged to pay a ransom to these people, and just recognize that that money is going to either a hostile state country or to a cyber criminal who is going to do it again.
Yeah.
And by paying that ransom, you have not really protected yourself. You've just advertised yourself as a potentially recurring customer.
Wow.
And there's no guarantee they're going to unlock your data the same way they did before. And there's no guarantee they're not going to sell your information on the dark web. So, but I know a lot of people are put in situations that they can't.
Well, and
control.
there was that the oil company was that couple years ago where a cyber attack happened, and they basically shut down the pipeline. And there's conflicting information about whether they paid a ransom or didn't pay a ransom, but it's scary situations like that say, listen, if we keep rewarding these guys, this is going to continue.
Right.
And so it's similar to hostages, and how, the U.S. doesn't negotiate for hostages, because if you start going in and giving people what they want, they're going to continue taking because you become a target.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. So what challenges do you feel the most significant for women around the world? With all of your travels and all of your work around the world, what challenges do you see?
We could do a whole podcast on this with an actual expert on that subject. I've seen there's so many horrible things that happen to women around the world, and things you don't even want to say out loud, like sexual slavery, that's genital circumcision. I mean, the challenges that you don't even think about day to day in the United States. Right to work, whether or not you live or die when you give birth to a child, and these are just tremendous challenges. And what I find particularly difficult about it is that there's no great U.S. solution to the problem, because sometimes when we intervene, we cause more problems for these individuals than we solve, because then that country that's oppressing these women points to them and says they're, a tool of the U.S. government.
Yeah.
That's happened in a lot of scenarios. So a lot of times you see the United States government being quiet because we don't want to create more problems for these women. But I love when I see, like what Iranian women are doing right now to create freedom for themselves. And they're taking tremendous risks to themselves. And I mean, sadly, that's what it takes for a culture to change. It has to come from the inside, not from the outside. But they need, they need their fathers and their brothers and their cousins to help them too.
They absolutely do. Well, and, so many women that I have spoken with in this room on this podcast have talked about men championing them in their corporations, and that it's made all the difference for them, because when you can get a man to say she is worthy and she is valuable and we need to take her seriously, it resonates differently with other men. Women can champion each other all we want to, and there's incredible value in that. And I think that we cannot, there's something to be said for women empowering women that's just irreplaceable. I mean, it's just something that we have to have all the time. But for men championing, it's taken differently by other men. And so in other countries, like you were saying, if the men can step up and say, I don't want my daughter or my wife or my mother or whomever to have to deal with the same oppression that others have had. And I brought this book up so many times, and I really love this book. Have you ever read the book Half the Sky?
No.
So Half the Sky was written by a married couple journalist for the New York Times, and she's Chinese and he is American, and together they were traveling all around the world writing for the New York Times, and they would bring back these stories of these incredibly powerful organizations that were doing grassroots efforts to make a difference. And they would bring it back to the New York Times, and they would say, yeah, we just don't think this is going to resonate with people, right? Like, we don't think this is relevant to, Bob on Wall Street or
Right.
Martha in Arkansas. Like we don't feel like this is relevant to our readers, so we don't really want to publish stuff like this. It doesn't affect the population we're dealing with. And it was so sad. And there's a proverb, I think, or there's some kind of saying in it says women hold up half the sky. And so really the book is dedicated to these women who are running grassroots organizations. And they said the reason is because they would have all these international organizations come in and try to help, and they were so ineffective,
Right.
because of the stigma you were talking about, well, it's the U.S. trying to gain a foothold in our area. They're just trying to come in and take over, and they don't understand our values, and they don't understand our, what we do in our culture. And so these international organizations would come in there and really just not be effective. But what would happen is a woman who was sex trafficked, would start an organization, grassroots, where she's literally just going and trying to find these girls because she knows where they're at. And
Right.
she knows the players who are part of this. And so, she's trying to make a difference. And the women who are having genital mutilation, she's trying to fight for their rights. And another woman who is trying to encourage women to stand up for their, for themselves. And another, woman who was burned with acid because, there was a rumor that she had cheated on her husband.
Right.
And, it wasn't true, but she's trying to protect other women who are in those same scenarios. And so it's just small organizations, these little tiny grassroots, no funding, no international support organizations that are making incredible differences in their communities.
Absolutely.
So, I think more people need to understand how, women supporting women and these grassroots organizations can really kind of make a huge impact. And I interviewed another woman on this podcast who her company just funds. She works for a company that they provide funding, donation for these grassroots organizations. So if I'm a company in the U.S. and I want to start making an impact internationally, I don't just have Red Cross and a few others to
Right.
give to. She'll actually connect you with these grassroots organizations. So I think stuff like that is really important too.
Absolutely.
So, what obstacles and challenges have you overcome through your journey?
So there's been a lot, some self-created, some others, but I always, for whatever reason, had a lot of confidence in myself. And one thing I've learned along the way is women do a lot of self-limiting, either not going after an opportunity or a job. And so I would find myself early in my career getting mad about something. And I finally told myself, well, why don't you say something? Because, and I found that did the trick in a lot of the time. Now, I was in an organization that really embraced diversity, so that's maybe not true in every organization. But my first assignment as an operations officer, I felt that I was being disadvantaged and I wasn't being given the leads that the men in the group were. And I absolutely adored my chief of station. And so I asked for some time to talk to him and said, hey, I would like an opportunity. I feel like all the guys in the office are getting the leads. And when I said that, he looked like he was going to have a heart attack on the spot. And he said, this will be fixed. And the next day, I had more work than I could do with. So I think sometimes it's an oversight or a perception that you don't, you want to do a particular type of work because you're a woman, or, a lot of men are, they're worried, she has children, maybe she doesn't want to travel. So you have to speak up for yourself. I had another example where I was further along in my career and I was coming into assignment, and I had a good enough reputation at that point that I was being given some great accounts. And so I was like, yes. but I was pregnant. And I was worried that if I walked into my new boss's office and he saw me pregnant, that he would quietly say, you know what, we made some changes and you're going to be doing different accounts. So for right or wrong, that day I bought for that day, I wore the tightest pair of Spanx that I could put on, an all black outfit. And I went in and we had our conversation. He assigned me the accounts and I thanked him and I promised him I would do my best possible job. And I said at the end, by the way, I am pregnant, full disclosure. And he said, oh, that's great. So the next day I came in my normal maternity clothes and one of the women said, I knew you were pregnant. I could tell you were hiding. And then I saw him in the lunchroom and he was having a glass of water and he spilled the water and he said, when you were pregnant, I didn't know you were that pregnant. How did you become that much more pregnant in a day? So, but what was done is done. And I didn't let him down. I didn't let any balls drop. That's the thing. If you say you're going to do it, then you got to do it.
Yeah. That's amazing. I love that. And I think you're right. I mean, had you gone in there and, full maternity clothes, he may have assigned you differently. And so good for you. I think that's an amazing story. So, and that kind of leads me into one of the questions I ask all the time. As women, we give our power away all the time, whether it's taking criticism or taking a different assignment or, whatever that might be. So is there a time that you did give your power away?
So yes. And that's a really good question. And I'm glad you asked people, but in my instance, it was an instance of me giving my own power away.
Right.
In the CIA and in GEMA, it's everything we do is a team sport. Yeah, so there's not a lot of me, it's a lot of we. And I was fortunate that I had really supportive situations. And like I said, I really think it's important to speak up early. And I did that throughout my career when I nipped it in the bud and said, hey, I feel like I need an opportunity here. But there was one time, and this was later in my career when I was in an executive role and we were filling positions and we were trying to identify a perfect candidate for a really important job. My boss came to me and he said, we can't seem to fill this. I don't know why. Why don't you think about applying, Linda? And I said, I'm not qualified. I don't have this. I don't have that. And I promise, boss, we'll keep looking. I'm going to find you that ideal person. And he looked at me quizzically and said, okay. And then he left. And I went home that night. And I asked myself, what did I just do?
Right.
I have been in angst my entire career that I feel like I've had to walk up the ladder one step at a time. And here I'm being offered a chance to go up 3 steps and I turned it down. These are the opportunities that supposedly only the guys get.
Right.
I went back the next day and I asked, hey, boss, can I have a minute of your time? And remember that thing we were talking about yesterday? Is it okay if I still apply? And he said, yes, Linda, absolutely. And so I competed and I got the job. And so, and I've never done that again. And I just put myself out there, and that doesn't mean that I've gotten everything I wanted. I definitely haven't. I've gotten a lot of rejections, but
of course,
if you don't let people know you're interested, they might not consider you.
Well, that's fantastic because it's really much, it goes in line with what I have found kind of across the board is that women undersell themselves and men oversell themselves. And so like if you're looking at a job application, and this is something that it's actually a proven fact that women will look at a job and say, I can't apply for that. I only have 80% of the qualifications. And so they will not apply for the job. And so many times it's us holding ourselves back because a man looking at that same job will say, oh, I've got this in the bag. I got 80% qualifications, and assume that job is his, right? Because he meets 80% of the qualifications. And, I think this goes across the board. It's not just, I think it goes with dating. I think men will kind of go, punch a little bit above their weight class and women never will. But I also feel like, women will downplay their skills, abilities, looks, everything. And so, unfortunately, that has become just a trend with us, and I would love to see that turn around and us go after those positions. We can absolutely take a job that we are 80% qualified for and kill that job. We can absolutely crush it at that job because we learn as we go. You can then become a little bit more, I would say, educated on what they want. And then be that person, right? And so, like, if they say, hey, I wish you had a little bit better skill set when it came to negotiation, that's a learned skill. That is not something that is impossible, right? So if they say you have to be 5'10" and you're only 5'6", you're never going to be able to be 5'10". But if it's, I need you to learn a little bit more about negotiation, no problem. There's some great books out there and great courses and great seminars, and that's a learnable skill you can teach yourself. And so I think we should start really looking at going after those opportunities, because you're right. Like you said, like, you've been looking for a long time for this perfect person. And meanwhile, you were the perfect person, right? And so you were the perfect person for the role, and you just had to believe that you were.
And I like what you said earlier, too, about the power of male bosses and mentors who do champion women. And I had that benefit in my career. Now, I did a bit of self-selecting to be around those type of male leaders that would give me opportunities. But for instance, in my current role, like, Director Stallings gave me a chance to be a deputy director. And, after just a brief time in state government, but
that's amazing.
So I want to make sure that I make them proud and do a good job. But there's a lot of people like him, and there's a lot of my former bosses in CIA that I still can't name that I would love to, but without them and their support, I wouldn't be where I am today.
Yeah, thank God for those guys. I agree. There's so many exceptional men out there who are championing women and giving us an opportunity, and we cannot look past the fact of the impact that makes, for the organization and for us and, all involved. So I want to kind of dive into a subject that is pretty important in any kind of law enforcement community or government community, and that's mental health. So, obviously you deal with a lot of really heavy stuff in the CIA, and you see a lot of really bad things that go on, but also, wishing you could help more, guilt, or, whatever that feels like. How do you protect your mental health, and what do you think could be done differently, and how do you think we can really support those in law enforcement better when it comes to mental health?
That is a really important question, and I'm so glad mental health is being talked about all across our society, to include young people these days. And the woman you mentioned earlier that worked in child exploitation, the things they have to see are so traumatizing, and they have to look at it day in and day out. And working in law enforcement, public service, CIA, FBI, the U.S. military, you start out and it's not so hard, but it does get more difficult over time. And so I really think people need to prioritize their own mental health. And a lot of organizations have services in-house, but those institutions are designed primarily to ensure fitness of service. They might help you, but they're there to ensure that you're fit to serve. So you really have to take breaks, recognize when you need that vacation or time away. And some of the things we would do in CIA is that a lot of people think, oh, working there, it must be like, James Bond movie or something, but it's really not. It's much more like living in a sitcom, because there's so much heavy stuff happening all the time that you have to be like, have gallows humor and there's a lot of jokes and all of that. But
you need a release. Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I think that's why you become so close to those you work with, right? And so there's a camaraderie when you're going through something really heavy, and it's like that shared trauma response. It's something like, when people are caught in an elevator, right? For hours and hours and hours, they talk about how those people have shared trauma and they create a bond. There's a trauma bond there, right? And whatever that is, and CIA and law enforcement obviously is way, way, way different than being stuck in an elevator with a group, but it's why you form such close connections and why they call them, the family or the brotherhood or whatever they call it, in their own unit. But that's something I think is so important, and people don't realize the close connections that you form, and it's mostly because you have that shared, bond with somebody that you can't get in a normal place, right? So they're going through something very similar, and so you can identify with that.
Right. And a lot of these institutions have kind of peer, formal or informal peer support, and just knowing when you see someone having a bad day to just to help them out. There's a lot of that. We did refer to ourselves in CIA as a family, and a lot of times people in an email would say brother, sister. That's how you would refer to each other. And when I joined GEMA, everyone said welcome to the family. So there is that idea that we're all in this together. And I think that peer support is more important than some employee assistant program. And there's a lot of pressure on senior managers these days to help their employees with their mental health, but senior managers only have so much bandwidth for that. So,
So, with mental health being so important and the things that you're dealing with, at the CIA or Homeland Security. So if you do go on a vacation, are you able to decompress? Are you able to kind of shut down for a little while and just take that mental break? Or is it just always there? I mean, especially if you're in the middle of an assignment, I would imagine.
Well, the great thing about taking a vacation in CIA is the security rules are such that you can't have any access to classified information. So you basically can't do your job.
Right.
And you were truly turned off. There's no one calling you. Like my husband has always been in the private sector, and he always gets calls. So, and we have R&Rs and all of that sort of thing. In GEMA, I haven't been there long enough to know about vacations, but it's been stressed to me that when people are on vacation, don't bother them. So,
I think everybody should maybe communicate that across the board, because I think we all just need, for our own mental health. And there's so many days. And with my job, we do security at events and venues, which mostly take place during the evenings and weekends. And so I feel like I never get a day off because I'm working, on work stuff all week. And then the weekends is employee calls and manager calls and venue calls. And it's just like, there's no shutting down. And so every once in a while, I'll do what I call go play in the dirt, which is where I go outside and I will mow the lawn and I'll plant things, because if my hands are filled with dirt, I can't answer my stupid cell phone. So I'll just go play in the dirt because it's like a forced vacation. Like, I'll play music really loud, can't hear my cell phone, and my hands are dirty. Oh, well, you're going to have to wait for a minute. So that's kind of my own little forced mental health break.
No, but that's an excellent point. You do have to force yourself to do it. And I've been on a kick since the start of the year, even if it's only for 10 minutes, to just exercise and to, do something to take a break in the day. Yeah.
Well, and exercise is so important. It's a stress reliever for me. It's not just about being healthy, which is, equally as important. Your body is healthy, but the mental health part of it, the mental health is crucial. And I had gotten into a bad habit of, when I would listen to my music, for a long time, I didn't bring my cell phone into the gym because it was my time away. Right. And then I started listening to music on my headphones. And so I'd have my phone on me, which meant that I was getting text messages and I'm getting all these other. So now I joined a class so that I have to put my phone away. But, it's that purposeful, intentional time that you gift yourself for, whatever mental health needs that you have. So I think that that's just so important, and just something we need to keep in mind, especially women. We're pulled in so many directions, right? So I feel like we never really are down, like we get home from a really high stress job, and now we're, trying to manage our household with our spouse and our kids and community stuff and volunteer stuff and shopping and whatever else is on our agenda. So it's really hard for us to take time for ourselves, but it's so crucial.
Absolutely.
So what advice would you give to 18-year-old you?
So I have teenagers, and I know 18-year-old Linda probably wouldn't have listened to me, just like my kids don't listen to me now.
Yeah.
But I would say to myself, have a little more fun while you're young, and you still maybe have some dance moves, and to take more vacations, because I worked pretty full on, and over and over again, I would work myself to burnout and then need to take a vacation that wasn't a real vacation. It was just being exhausted and coming back to work. So, and I would also tell myself to listen to Garth Brooks' The Dance, which I wouldn't have done because I didn't like country music back then, but really, I love the theme of that song, that life has ups and downs, and you're glad you didn't know it, because you would have missed the dance.
Right. Oh, I love that song. It just gave me chills. So one last question. This has just been such a great, insightful conversation. I've just truly enjoyed talking to you. But what do you wish more people knew?
Well, there's a few things. One, I touched on it earlier, that the CIA, and I would add FBI, other federal organizations, are much more diverse than people realize. People think of those organizations as white male-dominated groups, and that hasn't been true in CIA in a long time. We're not where we want to be in terms of diversity, but we've made tremendous strides, and there's power in that diversity because we do our jobs better. So people from all walks of life, and whether it's race or sexuality or religion, work at CIA. And because you're undercover, and the way we communicate, and especially if you're in the field, your identity is so obscured. You sometimes don't know if you're talking to a man or a woman if it's over email. So I would really encourage, we have trouble recruiting sometimes. And so I would encourage people, if you're interested, give it a try. The other thing I would put in a plug for is, I don't think enough people in the state of Georgia know how much the Georgia Emergency Management and Homeland Security does for this state. Yeah. So we're one of the few agencies that's not funded primarily by Georgia taxpayer dollars. We get most of our money from grants. So we are bringing money into the state.
Oh,
and
interesting.
the vast majority of that money by law has to go to counties and cities. So because of the ethos of the organization, we're not a me type group, but I will say that for them, since I'm new, that they do a tremendous amount of work, and they're just coming off of 3 years of being in a state of emergency status because of COVID. They set up all the mass vaccine sites. They did a lot there.
Wow. So Where can we find information to protect ourselves? So you said, so the CIA has a website that you can go to, and they'll have kind of unclassified information?
Well, the best source, the most transparent organizations right now, in my opinion, are CESA, which is a part of DHS that puts out a lot of information, practical tips on cybersecurity, physical security for buildings. FBI puts out a lot of information if you're part of their partner network. They also just put it out on LinkedIn or their websites. GEMA puts out information. So, and even NSA the other day put out some information. I was so proud of them. I'm like, NSA, you never talk to anyone, but they put out some information. So I would really look to those groups. Yeah,
because when you turn on the local news, all you hear is shooting here, stabbing here. This awful thing happened. But where's all the good news that we really could use in our lives that might protect us? Do we have to go seek out that information? Because I don't feel like the local news is telling us, hey, by the way, this is what's happening in the world. And I would love to see more of that.
Right. No. And it gets back to, being responsible for the own information that you consume and finding those sources, because the fact that the book you mentioned earlier, that those authors couldn't get their articles published, that's not what sells, that's not what people click on. And so you really have to find that positive information, because it affects your mental health.
It really does.
It affects your security, the way you view the world, the way you view politics, the way you view your community. And it can become and we've known this for years, that social media puts you in a silo, and you've got to break yourself out of that. And it's not that hard to do. So
yeah, I agree with you. And I know a lot of people who say, oh, I don't even watch the news. But then I'm like, well, but then where do you get your information? Oh, social media. It's like, that's even worse. Like,
right.
I need you guys to please be a good source of real information. But that it's actually hard to find. I feel like you have to seek it out these days. It's not readily given to you, and it's so skewed when it is. And so it's a little scary. It's a little scary out there, just, unless we can get really good, solid, unbiased information. I think it's hard to trust where the source is coming from. So
right. Well, and this is a very odd topic to be positive about, but I would look at where America is after COVID, and in a lot of ways, I mean, so many people died.
Yes,
our children lost education for years, their college opportunities. I mean, it was a tremendous tragedy. But if you compare our experience to the experience of other countries, what we didn't lose in that process was our civil liberties. A lot of countries, put apps on your phone.
Really?
And because they needed to know right where you were. I remember a serviceman telling me a story that he was in a Domino's in an Asian country, and he got an alert. You have been in proximity to someone with COVID, and now you were stuck in your teeny tiny room for the next however long it was. And it was because he went into that Domino's to pick up a pizza. That was it. It wasn't like a close and continuing contact like here. And those countries are not going to take that technology off those citizens' phones.
Right.
But we held on to our liberties. And again, that is, I don't, say that to minimize the tremendous tragedies and challenges we've had as a country. But I think comparatively speaking, we've come out of it stronger.
And it kind of goes back to the point of, for everything that you think is, a move forward, there's a sinister counter move, right? And so the counter move to that was, oh, we're doing this to protect you, but really they're doing this to track you. And so it's, when they're putting an app on your phone, they can use that for a lot of really awful things. Right. And so, I agree. Wow, that's really good to know. But
And I'm coming out of 25 years of living a life, in clandestinity, and now I'm in this world of radical transparency. and again, I just think, the best thing we can do as a country is have well-informed citizens that know the risks, understand it, know how to get good information, and be smart about their own safety in all aspects of life. And we're just going to be so much stronger.
Absolutely. Well, amen to that, and we'll end on that note. But thank you so much, Linda Criblez, for being here and being just such an amazing inspiration. And I love your story, and I love everything that you're doing. So kudos to you for the new position.
Thank you.
And I just know this next part of your journey is going to be just as exciting and just as rewarding and just as impactful as everything you've done so far.
Thank you. I'm looking forward to it. And thank you again for everything you are doing for women. This is an incredible platform. And thank you for giving me the opportunity to tell my story.
Fantastic. Well, I hope everyone has an amazing day, and you can find more about Linda Criblez on prettypowerfulpodcast.com. Thank you so much. Have an amazing day.
Thank you for joining our guests on the Pretty Powerful Podcast. And we hope you've gained new insight and learned from exceptional women. Remember to subscribe or check out this and all episodes on prettypowerfulpodcast.com. Visit us next time, and until then, step into your own power.